Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeronimo Vasquez. I'm supervisor for District 2 and current vice chair. Thank you for being here tonight. Hopefully, we'll have a good conversation about the progress and where we're at with stuff and kind of the process moving forward. We've been working hard. We have been able to raise funding for some of these projects, and we're having to go step by step through projects. And so we're finally down to this corridor where we can have this conversation and kind of share where we're at with the work. And so, I appreciate all of you being here. Ask you to be patient with us because we are doing the best we can. In the fall, when we kind of pitched that we needed to raise $150 million for all the fire and flood mitigation following last year's flooding, we've raised about $100 million, and the key piece that we're still missing is transportation, the highway improvement, drainage improvements on 89, but we're still pounding the pavement and really working to try to raise that funding. And we're going through the projects as we can, and so we're doing the best we can as we move forward. So we really appreciate you here, and just know that we are working as hard as we can to get things where we can be the best we can, considering the circumstances and just how quickly we've been able to move since last year. And compared to previous efforts, we're several years ahead of schedule in terms of if you compare just Schultz. So we're working on it and really appreciate you being here and your patience. And with that, I'll hand it over to Lucinda.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. All right, good evening. I'm Lucinda Andriani. I serve as the Flood Control District Administrator. I think you all know that, and Deputy County Manager. And we're excited to be here this evening to launch the engineering for the Peaceful Way flood corridor. We did meet last fall and took into account a lot of feedback that we got since then. And you're going to see some new information coming from Mike Carrolley with Natural Channel Design, who is the engineer for this corridor, and see a new proposal in terms of channel alignment. And so tonight, I want to be honest, it's going to be a bit of a tough love conversation tonight. We need to move very rapidly. We're basically starting from ground zero. So we have to get all of the NEPA clearances for the NRCS. We do have most of the NEPA clearance on for us now. We just got that last week. However, if the engineers identify additional areas that will need to be addressed in this process, then we'll have to do get additional clearances. So. And there's just, the whole engineering process, securing the drainage easements, all of that process takes a lot of time. Mortgage releases, there's a lot of heavy lifting that needs to go on because we're starting from ground zero. So, one and most important message is that it's going to take, okay, there we go. Let's try this. Okay, we must have messed something up here with the machine. No, could not connect to server.
Yeah, we changed this.
Is it?
It's no longer working.
Yeah. Not yet. And there it goes. Okay, I can just hit that. That's fine. So we have a lot to accomplish, and it's going to take some decisions in the short term, within the next month, that we're going to have to make you are going to have to make some very important decisions very soon for us to stay on schedule and be able to get into construction. The goal will be to relocate the utilities this fall, as well as potentially do some work in the upper part of the watershed this fall, and then complete all the channel work and rest of the on-force work next spring to get this all done before monsoon. And we're basically on a we're on a similar cycle as last time, although the supervisor's correct. We're 3 years ahead, 2 years plus ahead. But we need every minute of that time to be able to go to construction at that timeline. And we have to have every drainage easement to start anything. So that's the critical process. And that takes your cooperation and engagement. So we're here to launch tonight, and so just a couple reminder slides. One is this slide. You saw this last time we met in the fall, and you can see Peaceful Way is here. Let's see if this will still work. Yes, Peaceful Way is here, and you can see we have significant the orange bars are post-tunnel, didn't have much impact from tunnel, but importantly, the blue is the modeling that we did post-Schultz, all the Schultz mitigation, of which, of course, you all know did not occur in this corridor, but that's what was modeled at that time based on a certain amount of recovery on the mountain and some other considerations. So we've seen obviously a dramatic increase in the flood flows, and you're well aware of that, and based on the impacts, particularly of those of you the closer to the forest. The closer to the forest, the more impact there's been. These are the flood impacts. This is the analysis. We certainly have modeled, done a lot of different modeling out for the area, but this is kind of the 2-inch storm, which is the storm that we modeled the short-term mitigation to for the barrier and sandbagging. You can see for the 2-inch storm in 45 minutes, it's producing 1,535 cubic feet per second of water, and that's at the boundary of the forest, and that basically equates to a 25-year rainfall event, which is a 4% chance occurring in any given year. Doesn't mean it could occur 5 times in 1 year, but that's the statistical probability. So you can see that, the key message here is there was a lot of impact across this area, which again, you're well aware of. Particularly, we have 2 main areas that are really impacted. One is this kind of southern flow through here, and then huge amount of flow coming through this area as well, and coming down through this. To the north of you, probably most of you are aware, is that we have expanded the Brandis Channel, and we're currently shotcreting that. I think they expect to be done next week. We're also doing some work on forest there as well, and we expect to see the flows coming from Brandis, the overflow there reducing. Obviously, it could depend on the rainfall event. We get a great big rainfall event, it will overflow. But we've increased that capacity to Rick, about 1,100 CFS through that channel now. So with the modifications we've made, and then shotcreting it so that it's resistant to erosion, which it had very severely eroded. So those you have seen, and I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk through, okay, where do we stand? Where are we? And, to that end, I've mentioned some key points already, but as I mentioned, we're starting really from ground zero, although we have secured the Forest Service approval to do the work on forest. That's significant. That decision was actually signed last week. But again, if we need additional area, we will have to go and get those approved as well. Funds are limited. We put in an application very quickly last summer. You have to put in your application within a prescribed time frame to be eligible within a certain time of the flood events that occur within that area. And we put it in very quickly so that we could start advocating for those funds through the federal process, because we knew at that time that the Emergency Watershed Protection Program through NRCS, which is going to fund about 75% of this, probably about 65% of this work off Forest, is that fund had been drained, and they had exhausted with all the disasters and everything going on across the country. I think they had funded it about 2 years prior at least 400 to 600 million, and it had been exhausted, and they had a backlog of over 900 million. That's what got funded in 2 days before Christmas. And it was our senators that really made that happen. So we were very fortunate, and Congressman O'Halloran. As I mentioned, Mike is going to present an alternative alignment tonight, and I will say, and he will discuss this in a lot more detail, that alternative alignment is actually the preferred alignment. And the reason for that is that we learned a lot of lessons from the engineering that we just completed in our starting construction within the Wupaki corridor. And some of those lessons, really have shown us in terms of what we can propose and move forward without violating the no adverse impact process. So Corey Helton, that's in the back, with Jay Fuller, every time we come up with an engineering design for a corridor, we run it through the no adverse impact analysis. And what that does is it compares what happens, what is going on now with no mitigation, to what will occur if we implement the mitigation. And he looks at it at different storms. So a 1-inch storm, 2-inch storm, 3-inch storm, he looks at it different. We look at, are we creating an adverse impact beyond what the impact was in the background? And there's criteria that have to be met. You will see all that analysis. Those of you that were here in 13 saw it all then too. You will see that analysis. But we've learned some lessons through that process this time, engineering Wupaki, about how much we can make bends and channels and all that fun stuff, and actually how much can we actually convey through a channel if we have variations on that channel design. So we'll be applying those lessons learned to this. Combination of that, and then we got feedback for the alignment that he presented last time. There were flat out a set of people who said they would never ever give us an easement, never. And I think they have their reasons for that, but they were just flat out not interested and not willing to do that. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but they were not interested or willing to do that. So Mike went back to the drawing board, and again, he'll be presenting an alternative here tonight. I think I covered most of those. And as we work through the engineering, we have some goals of what we're trying to achieve. But frankly, through that exercise with Wupaki Trails, we ended up having to downsize what we were able to do. We're still having a very significant impact there. We're still going to, in total, from 140 CFS to up to what in combination we're at about 1,100 CFS. So we're significant increasing the capacity of the mitigation system there, but there are limits. There's financial limits, there's technical limits. Wupaki was a huge exercise, let me tell you. We struggled with that, and I think this corridor is going to be very similar in that process. It's going to be a challenge technically. So, I think that slide got in there twice, it looks like. So what I want to emphasize here, though, is that we need a decision very soon. And the first decision point is, will the property owners that are along the alignment be willing to provide a right of entry? And the right of entry doesn't commit you to do anything beyond allow the engineers to come onto your property, and largely it's to be able to access to look at the topography, conduct survey work, that type of thing, part of the engineering, gathering the data to be able to conduct the engineering. It doesn't give us any right to do anything, and I'll talk more about this. Doesn't give us a right to construct, doesn't give us a right to do anything with your property. It solely is for to be able to conduct work in support of the engineering, and I'll talk more about that later. But again, we're going to really set a deadline. We have got to set a deadline, because if we don't have the cooperation, then we've got to move ahead with other work. And I'm really hopeful this time that we can get cooperation in the corridor and we can move this forward. It's, my belief, my perspective is this system is desperately needed there. There are people, particularly up close to the forest, who are losing huge swaths of their property to erosion and other impacts, and their homes are at risk, their children are at risk. It's devastating to see that. So I'm hopeful everybody will work with us and that this time we can take it across the finish line. So tonight, the way the processes work is Mike's going to walk through his slides. I'll come back, talk a little bit more about the drainage easement process and the right of entry process. Kitty has rights. Raise your hand, Kitty. Kitty's our right-of-way agent. She has rights of entry forms. The more forms we get tonight, the better. And we're going to be tracking that. And again, we're going to have to set a hard deadline. And so we'll go over this. We'll take some general questions from the group for a few minutes, but then we'll break so that you can go look at the maps and the plan and the conceptual plans, very preliminary plan that Mike has, and ask questions about your specific property, okay? And that's, we don't want to get into specific questions with the whole group, but those that are, particularly those of you that are along either one of the alignments, but particularly this new southern alignment, please go have a conversation and understand what's being proposed at this point, knowing that we don't have a lot of detail yet. We know we need a channel. We know that it needs to be hardened. And we have some goals we want to try to accomplish, but at this point, we can't tell you hard and fast it's going to be this, this, this. That's why we need your right of entry to do the engineering, to figure out what we can do, right? What's possible, what can we do? And obviously, we're going to, within all the constraints we have, we're going to try to deliver as much flood mitigation as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike unless anybody has process questions right now. And I'll go back through some of that other process stuff after Mike presents too. So great, thank you. Just push over here like this.
Well, good evening.
Just tap it, I should say, not push, tap.
Curious, how many people, I know there's a lot of familiar faces in here, and I know there were a lot that attended in the fall, but is there anybody here that did not attend last fall's meeting? Just
Couple
a few
people.
Okay. Well, some of this, my slides are going to be kind of repeats of what I had last fall, but I'm going to go ahead and go over it, refresher, reminder. Anyhow, get started here. I know that it's stating the obvious, but as Lucinda said, the pipeline fire had a huge impact on the watershed above you through the forest. What we saw from last summer was significant gullying and sediment deposition on the watershed up on the forest. We had places where down near the neighborhood, we've got banks, vertical banks that are near 6 feet high. I have seen some vertical banks up above going up towards the 420 road. And in some of the other watersheds, they're in excess of 10 feet high, even higher than that. So obviously this, the increase in flows that we saw was 7 times what they were pre-pipeline has just torn apart that watershed up above your neighborhood.
And Mike, one thing that I no, I just lost it, failed to point out was that, the last year, we had 45 major flood events. The largest storm event that we had was a 10-year storm. So less than half of what we modeled and what you saw on the map in terms of impacts is what we experienced. So for these set of watersheds, it's much more likely that we'll see much bigger events. Historically, Corey we as a team, really coming from Jay Fuller, identified, looking at the gauge data from 2010 forward, what is the typical event that we see that creates pretty significant impacts that we want to set up that, particularly that short-term mitigation to. And so no, we could have a much worse summer this year than last year. That could very easily, you never know, right? No one can predict the monsoon, but we could have much worse events than last year. So.
Right. And so you're saying that it was.
On that positive note, take
Yeah,
it
no,
away,
positive.
Mike.
So basically, from out of that, take from that too, that just because you got through last year's storm event, all those events doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't see another one, or larger one. And the storm that we're modeling, as Lucinda said, is the 2-inch and 45-minute monsoon type event, a downpour across the entire watershed. That's 2 inches. As a reminder for those of you who were around in 2018 when we had the large storm event that dropped on the Brandis watershed, on the Thames watershed, that was 5 inches in about an hour. And so they do happen. And so through the forest, we had areas where we've had, in excess of 5 feet of deposition in what was the old channel. So there's a lot of sediment load up there coming down, and a lot of potential for erosion on the forest and through the watershed there. So what are we doing up on the forest, and what does the watershed restoration measures mean above the forest? Basically, from the neighborhood boundary over here, this is the Timberline neighborhood, Highway 89 is over here. This is the burn scar. This is the east flank of the peaks. We've got three corridors shown in this slide. We've got the Thames watershed where construction is ongoing right now. You've seen Mike Garrison and Tiffany Construction are busy repairing that watershed, repairing those alluvial fans from all the damage that occurred last fall or last summer, and enhancing and expanding those fans to account for the extra increase in flow that we saw from the pipeline fire versus the Schultz. In the Peaceful Way watershed, this is the one that leads into your neighborhood. This boundary right here that goes all the way to the top of the mountain and down, that's what's collecting water from this storm and it's sending it right into your neighborhood. As that one slide said, we've got about 1,500 cubic feet per second that gets delivered to the neighborhood right at that location. What we can do for the watershed restoration work is basically from the 420 road down to the neighborhood, we have opportunities to create alluvial fans or restore the natural alluvial fan that was there. We can and enhance that too to provide more capacity to capture sediment, store sediment on the watershed, so that mud and debris that you were getting last year, much more of that gets stored, gets stopped on the forest before it comes down through the neighborhood. We also have the opportunity to do some channel stabilization work. Where we can't do fans, where the existing valley up there is a little bit too narrow, we can stabilize the channel to reduce the bank erosion that's occurring or the down cutting in the channel, and again, reduce the sediment load that's coming towards the neighborhood. Up at the 420 road, we'll also stabilize that road crossing so that doesn't cut down. Right now, it's serving, and it has served as a bit of a grade control structure but we want to keep that from all this erosion from head cutting back up into that watershed and scouring out and bringing more sediment downstream. Also on this slide, we've got the Copeland watershed for your neighbors to the south. We have opportunities there similar to this that we can do alluvial fan work and channel stabilization up to and even beyond the 420 road in that watershed. So what are we doing in the watershed restoration? These are pictures from the museum fire area, museum burn scar that we did last spring. We did design and construction of that. And what we're doing is taking these what had been previously a fairly healthy alluvial fan that was functioning, that was letting water spread out and drop, cut the energy down, drop the sediment out. But post-fire, they gullied through. And you can see this channel right here. Originally, the soil was right up to there, but it scoured out. And these gullies are very efficient in transporting the sediment that comes to them from above, from high up in the watershed, up on the mountain. Very efficient in transporting that water down through and to the downstream areas and neighborhoods. And what we want to do is take all these gullies, the alluvial fans that have been cut through, and return it to a wide alluvial fan, and even wider than it was to begin with. And that's what we did over there on the museum fire. This is the west tributary up on the Mount Elman Lookout Road. And that allows all this water that's up in the watershed on the high, steep slopes to come down, hit the wide spread out fan, drop its speed, drop its sediment, and also reduce the down cutting through all these gullies. We include a lot of rock grade control at the base of that fan, so that the head cuts don't migrate up back through the fan and create all these gullies that we saw post burn and post flooding. So what are some of the things we do when we restore the fans? Well, first of all, there's a lot of grading that occurs. We take, and in that previous slide, there's a lot of cutting and filling to create a broad sloping plane for that water that comes out from when it's a concentrated channel to drop out, spread out, and return to an alluvial fan function, the natural alluvial fan function. But there's also a lot of rock work that occurs. These are called cross vein weirs. You can see the scale of those rocks that Mr. Garrison back there is able to get. And sort of, we've got 4-foot diameter boulders, sometimes bigger. This is generally in a channel, and what we do is we put those in the bottom of the channel to keep that from down cutting, from incising even deeper than it currently is. And the vein arms work to pull stress off of the banks to reduce the bank erosion potential. And so that one's under construction. This is an example of one that has already seen flows. This is in the Campbell watershed below the terminal trench. So a lot of rock work there. These alluvial fans, just before we get down into the neighborhood, we end those in a terminal trench. And what that does is serves to collect that spread out flow and gather it back up into one area. Basically, it's a basin with one outlet. That leads to an outlet. It goes to an outlet channel, and then that leads into the neighborhood infrastructure that we'd like to put in. These terminal trenches, I said they have one outlet. Actually, there's two. There's the channel outlet, but then there's the downstream alluvial fan. So the outlet channel takes what we can deliver to the downstream storm drain system. But above and beyond that, it overtops and goes to and drains basically to the areas that it would have had we not put any infrastructure downstream. So it's not a cure-all, but it is able to peel off a large amount of the water that is otherwise headed to the neighborhood. And then on the alluvial fans also, that broad sloping plane I mentioned, we put a lot of grade control across it, completely across that alluvial fan to hold the elevation, prevent the gullying. There's a lot of rock work that goes in there. This is a rock sill that's been put in there. We also, depending on availability of materials, we may use green logs, trees that they cut down to create the alluvial fan. If they're available, we'll use rocks or logs. And all that does is prevent the gullying, the rills erosion that starts happening in the alluvial fan. If it starts gathering up some speed and starts eroding up, before it can get too deep and go too far, it'll hit this rock sill and basically stops it. So after all that grading and after all the rock work, we reseed the alluvial fans, reseed any disturbed areas, and apply mulch. Our goal is to restore it back to a grassed natural alluvial fan. That all that grass, all that root all the roots from the grass, help stabilize the fan, prevent erosion, and return it back to something that's fairly pleasant to look at. This is just showing another log sill that's going in, as I mentioned, on an alluvial fan over on the museum fire. Okay, that's the on-forest work, and like I said, the goal of that, one of those slides mentioned, the main goal of all the on-forest restoration is to reduce the sediment supply to the neighborhood so that the storm drain infrastructure, the channels, actually will work and function properly. If we built all of these spent all the money down through the neighborhood building storm drains and channels, if it's still getting the amount of sediment supply that it would receive if we didn't do anything on the forest, likely that those channels would not work. They would clog up and overtop and into the neighborhood. They really wouldn't do any good. And the maintenance budget on that too would be enormous, because they basically have to be cleaned out after every storm event. So, refer back to my notes here. Otherwise I'll forget. So through your neighborhood, as you know, your neighborhood was not a formal subdivision. It was not designed and constructed as a formal subdivision. It's a development of a numerous lot splits over time. And so without being developed and having gone through that process, as you know, there's no formal roads, there are no formal storm drain systems or anything else. And so as a result of that, the water as it leaves the forest is just going to follow the topography whatever it can find, and it'll erode away. In your neighborhood, the Timberline neighborhood in particular, has a lot of highly erodible soils. So what the NRCS funding that the district was able to get allows for the possible implementation of some storm drain infrastructure that otherwise would have been put in had it been a formal subdivision, gone through the formal subdivision process. So what's our design criteria? As mentioned a couple times, the district is looking at the 2-inch and 45-minute storm event generally as a pretty significant monsoon event. And I'll reiterate, is more than what we saw in any of the storms last year. 1535 cubic feet per second at the forest boundary is what we're looking to, not necessarily mitigate all of it, but it's what we're looking at as what we have coming to us and what we need to design to mitigate. Whether that's mitigate by taking it away directly in a channel, storm drain, and then look at and account for and prepare for the overtopping of that terminal trench to continue on down through the rest of the neighborhood. We need to look at all that and make sure that we have none of the adverse impact.
And that's a goal. There's no guarantee that we'll get to that. Like I mentioned in Wupaki, we had a goal and we were not able to get there for technical reasons. So,
right, yeah. We weren't able to maintain, or weren't able to completely carry the entire 2-inch and 45-minute storm.
We're
in
close,
the storm
but not entirely.
We also are required to achieve a positive cost-benefit ratio. That's a requirement in the NRCS funding. And then we also, again, no adverse impact downstream. So what we're looking at, not that when we put in this infrastructure, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a storm event that might still result in the adjacent properties or the other properties away from the channel still being flooded. It's just that it's not going to be flooded any worse than it would had we not done anything. And in most cases, especially with the large amount of water that we're able to fit into these channels, and we're peeling that right off the top of the storm, of the flow that's coming into the neighborhood. I mean, it's intuitive that the impacts for the rest of it are going to be reduced. So nothing you don't know, but the neighborhood conditions post-22, you've got all kinds of deep gullying down through your neighborhood, and then where there aren't deep gullies, you've got a lot of sediment deposition piling up. And that's what we're looking to see if we can make some improvements. I know some of these maps have gone out. Some of you looked at the maps already in the back. But these are the two alternatives we're looking at. The northern route was the one that we presented last fall. It's much longer. I mean, It's about 750 feet longer than the southern route. But this is the one, the reason that we chose that last fall was because that's where we saw most of the impact from last year's storms. There was you can see just by looking at the channels from this photograph, which is taken in October of last year, you can see how the evolution of the channels has occurred, bringing it all down here, generally gullying all the way through here, and then sediment deposition for most of the rest of the way with a few isolated head cuts here and there. But this was put together to really follow where that impact was. Figuring that we might have cooperation, given if there's a lot of flooding being experienced, we might have cooperation and people willing to provide the easements in order to construct a channel. But since then, and with all the experience that we saw in Wapatki, this would be a very difficult channel anyhow to build. All these meanders and bends reduces the capacity of the channel with a spillover in the dynamics of that flow. And it's also, like I said, it's longer and more expensive, and there are also a fair amount of utilities in there that we'd have to cross that would also add to the expense that the NRCS doesn't cover. Right. The district have to pick up the cost of relocating those utilities. So following last fall's meeting, we had several of you that approached me and from the southern corridor that were interested in, hey, maybe you could put the corridor down through or adjacent to my property. So we started exploring that, and it makes a lot of sense. There's not as severe a flooding impact that we saw from last year, but there is impact down here that we can work to mitigate if we were to choose the southern corridor. It's 4,700 feet long. We would have probably 4 box culverts along this route. It could still carry, it'll still carry a significant amount of water, likely more, when the engineering's all done, likely more than the northern route can carry, just because of its straighter configuration. And what would it look like? Basically, this is the pictures you guys you probably saw last fall. These are pictures of the Mountain Dell storm drain system on the west side of Flagstaff. We're looking at about a 20-foot wide channel, about 3 to 4 foot vertical sides. This was constructed in concrete, but what we're using in Wapatki and what we use in this neighborhood would be shotcrete. Similar product. I mean, it's cement based, but it's different construction techniques and ends up being more cost effective. But bottom line is you'd have a channel, a hardened channel going down through your neighborhood with the steel rails, the metal bars on both sides to keep people and livestock out of there. And just more pictures of that. And then, why concrete? A lot of people ask that. So it's much smaller footprint. We can fit a whole lot more water in a much narrower footprint. So there's less property impact than would be in an earthen line channel. And so that's why we've chosen on this round to go ahead and shoot for the concrete channel.
And it doesn't erode.
And it's
Last time
it's much
we
less
lost a lot
erodible
of
than
channels.
the earthen channel. Yes. So much less maintenance, and it'll be there for a while. So.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Hopefully I covered it all.
Yeah, and just want to emphasize that these two systems, the on and off forest systems, they are integrated and they have to work together. And that's why if we don't do the work on forest, measures downstream won't work. They will just clog up with sediment and debris. And they have to work in tandem. We also have to have, once we gather that water up that comes off the forest, it has to go into a system to safely go through the neighborhood. It can't just be left to, create damage. So that's the whole intent. We have seen, although the measures on forest are the whole goal there is reducing sediment. We have seen historically with Schultz Museum, they have also reduced the volume of water. You spread that water out, you slow it down, particularly earlier in the season, it soaks in, has an opportunity to soak in, right? So we've seen that benefit. Certainly saw a lot of that benefit in the Schultz, particularly in these bigger fan areas. So, all right, moving now to discuss the easements. And where are we going? What are the next steps to move everything forward here? Get to the right slide here, so I'm on the right page. So relative to the right of entry, again, a right of entry it's a pretty simple form, and that is signed by the property owner. Can't be signed by a renter. It has to be signed by the person who actually owns the property. But very importantly, it doesn't obligate you to do anything in the future. All it's doing is allowing access for the engineers to go on. We have to do surveying. There are geotechnical tests that have to be done on the soil so they can gauge, how much compaction's needed underneath the channel, what type of soil conditions are there and so forth. So there's a number of things that have to take place to be able to take the engineering to the next level. And so that's what the right of entry is for. This work is really, if we can't get that right of entry and then we can't go to the next level of engineering. So, this is a critical step. So, but again, it doesn't obligate you to provide in a drainage easement. Obviously, we hope you will, but it doesn't obligate you to that. And we're setting a deadline, and you'll see it here on the slide. We need right of entry forms no later than the end of June. So you got about 6 weeks, but by the end of June, we got to have the right of entries if we're going to continue this process. Because otherwise we need, we're going to have to move on. We got to know that people want to move forward with this project, and it's a way to vote, in effect, to get the engineering moving forward. So as we move through that process, once we get the right of entries, then we can move to the 30% engineering level, and typically we would have a meeting at that time, share that engineering with you. Where are we going? What do we know at that point? And then typically at about 50-60% of the engineering is when then we're at a point where we will need to secure the easements to be able to continue through the rest of the engineering process and then ultimately go into construction. The other piece to right of entry that I should mention, because this is really critical, is that we do have to conduct physical surveys of the area that would be, in that easement area, to determine if there are any archaeological sites, if there are any biological wildlife or any other types of issues that may influence it. Largely, the National Environmental Policy Act, really the big focus is archaeological sites, and we will be hiring an archaeological firm that will come out and perform those. And again, that's another reason we need the right of entry. They will stay within the corridor. They're not interested in anything else, just the corridor itself, that easement area, but that will have to be cleared before we can complete the engineering. So, or move through the engineering process. What is a drainage easement? It will provide access to the district. Again, once we get to about the 60% engineering point, that drainage easement then indicates that you're willing to have that project constructed on your property. That's what you're providing, legal access to the district to come on and perform that work, to construct that channel. So it's a legal instrument. It has to be notarized and so forth. You will retain the ownership of that property. You're giving an easement to basically use that piece of your property for the purpose of flood mitigation. So, how might your property be affected? And during the engineering process, by the time we get to 60%, we're going to be able to show you, and that'll be communication Mike will be doing with you, is here's what's proposed. It may be 3 feet deep, maybe 4 feet deep. We don't know yet. He has to do the engineering before we know what the exact configuration of what's going to look like in terms of that area. It should not affect your zoning. We will do adjustments to the property to ensure that you retain your zoning. So you're within a certain zoning. Some of you are 1 acre parcels, some are 2.5, some are larger. You'll retain that zoning within your property. It will limit what you can do within that easement area. You can't construct, obviously, because there'll be a channel area, and then there will be, usually it's about 10 feet or so, for access for maintenance. And that area, you will not be able to construct within that area. And if we go to a concrete rectangular channel, as he showed up there, if that ultimately is the design, there will be fencing on both sides of that channel as well. So it will limit what you can do with that property. The goal, if you looked at what he's proposing for the vast majority of those properties, he's looking at splitting the easement between 2 properties. So each person gives up less land. You're sharing that easement impact. And frankly, a good chunk of that falls within your setbacks. So you're probably a good chunk of that land you couldn't construct on today. That would not be legally, able to construct on that land today. But some may be outside that area as well. So obviously the whole goal is to reduce the impacts and do this without creating any adverse impacts, either upstream or downstream. So then always the key question is, are you going to be compensated? We don't get any funding to compensate for drainage easements. None of the federal funds can be used for that purpose. So we either have funding to do the construction, the engineering and construction, or we buy the land. We can't do both. So this was exactly the same approach we used during Schultz, is that we require that people donate the easement. And that has to be a partnership if we're going to get this done. And so the donation of the easement, it does potentially afford you the opportunity, because it is considered a donation to a government, which is tax deductible. How that applies to you and your taxes, that's something you would need to go to your tax CPA or tax preparer and we'll provide you all the documentation so that you can do that process. But I can't stand here and tell you you'll get this or you'll get that, because I don't know what your tax basis is, right? You'll need to consult with a tax professional on that, but we'll provide all the documentation so that you can do that. The process that we use conforms, with what's called the Uniform Act, and that is an act, a federal act that requires that we provide certain information to you about the acquisition, the donation of the property for the project. And there are these various steps that we'll go through: notice of intent, the offer package, and of course the easement agreement and the valuation. We have a professional appraiser who's been doing this work probably 30, 40 years, and he will do all the actual appraisals based on comps, and we'll set a value for that easement. That's how we know what you can then take to your tax preparer to say, I'm donating this value. So that's all part of that process. Will be guided by the Uniform Act and the federal codes. Even though we aren't using federal money, it's really we still will utilize those particular laws in this process. We have, in addition to Kitty, we have brought in a firm, Tierra Right-of-Way Services, who will actually be assisting us with securing the easements. And so in that process, once you've spoken with Mike and you've seen what's proposed and so forth, then we'll present the documents. It'll likely be someone with Tierra that will provide those documents to you and go through those with you. So, and again, we can't move forward without the right of entry forms. And then certainly once we get the engineering to 60%, then we've got to have the drainage easements to be able to move to construction. Obviously, legally, we can't come on your property without that drainage easement. So those are two critical pieces that have to align within the timeline that we have to get everything constructed before the next, before the 24 monsoon season. So the decision is really, it's up to you, to those of you that are along the alignment that's been proposed. It's once again, just like it was back in 13, it's really your decision. And, I will say that we need to see very strong interest. This county, this district has, in fact, we have not ever, one time that I know of, have we imposed condemnation. And the conversations historically with the board have been that, I would say that if we have a small number of holdouts, a pretty small number of holdouts, that'll be something I'll take to the board and they will consider condemnation. But it's not a decision taken lightly. It's not one that we've historically invoked. We want to work in partnership with you to get this project done. If you don't want the project, we'll move on and take the money somewhere else and do more in another corridor, frankly. That's what we'll do. That's what we did last time, and that's what we'll do this time. And no looking back. It's your decision. We move on. And so, but I think the other piece to this for the district is that we're spending a lot of money out clearing your roads and dealing with the consequences of the flooding. So there is that component to all this, right? There is an impact to the district. If we don't do anything, there remains some level of impact because we do make an effort to try to keep the roads open and passable. I don't know how long that will go on. Like at some point, is there going to be a cease to that? I don't know. But there is a cost to that. Last year we spent, now grand total now, I think when we met with you before, we were at about 6 to 7 million. We have just topped 9 million in terms of our costs for last year, short-term mitigation and response costs. We can't do that over and over again. So this mitigation is not only important to you, but it's important, to the whole system, the whole flood control district system. So we're at a time to act now. It's time to act. It's time to make some decisions. Are you going to move forward or not with this? And we look forward to getting those decisions soon. So, and you're going to have questions. Again, I really encourage you to go meet with Mike, have conversations. Another engineer back here, Julie's with us, Julie Lee with Peak Engineering, and Rick's here with us as well, Rick Schroeds from Civil Tech. Talk with them and get the information you need. If we need to do a follow-up meeting and get out onto the ground and meet with you, then we can facilitate that. And make sure you get the information so that we can get a decision by the end of June. So with that, let me turn to this. And certainly if you leave here tonight and you go, gee, I wanted to ask this question and I didn't, or something comes up that you want to ask a couple weeks from now or whatever, or need to check in with us on something, this email, it's on the web page, the Flood Control District web page as well. If you use that email, both Sean and I get those emails, and we'll get back to you and make every effort to get you a response. So,
Question.
yes.
Okay, we'll say that this, so this is all ideal, okay? Everybody signs the easements and everything, okay? Are you guys gonna, keep maintenance up on these things?
Yep, we're
Even- wait,
responsible.
Wait, let me
Yeah.
finish. Even though that we're private,
So,
you always come up with this private land, and that's the thing
So-
that cuts us off,
so we
Okay.
will maintain the channels and
even
it,
though it's on private land.
absolutely, no, we are, and that will say this in the drainage easement, we are responsible for all maintenance of the channels. Once, and we've done all the maintenance, Campbell, Copeland, you know,
And
all.
what's the cost gonna be to us as the private owners?
Well, you pay a flood control district annual tax. It's not very much, frankly, but you pay, and that will come out of that tax. You won't pay specifically for any maintenance.
Any extra or
Nope.
anything like that?
Nope.
But you will maintain those.
Right, we'll maintain the channels. Yes, Monica. Hi.
So you mentioned if you do the square culvert, that one type of fencing will be going along it. So a lot of us have livestock fencing, some pretty elaborate livestock fencing. And so like with the square culvert, would you then tie into our existing fencing? And if you don't go with square, I mean, there's some bank back there keeping the horses in.
Right now, what we are planning to construct is horse fence. So what is it, the 2-inch by
The no climb?
4-inch
With
welded?
the steel posts, welded top, and then the no climb.
I will say yes, but let me get back to you with.
That's all right.
when
I think
when
we're
get
saying
back,
the
I
same
can
thing.
Provide more detail. We'll get that out to everybody.
All right.
Also, make sure you signed up on the sign-up list, because as we go through this, like questions like this, I want to get that information out to everybody, because Monica's not the only one with horses. So, you know, we can get that spec out to you, but we're working with Buffalo Fence, and we just spec'd a horse fence that is much more difficult to climb and is pretty sturdy. We did construct some areas with that back in 13. There were some areas where we did use that same welded horse fence, and it held up pretty well. I mean, there were some areas that the flooding was way beyond. It got destroyed, you know, not gonna tell you it was perfect. But in a lot of the areas, it held up pretty darn well. And it held up through the 2018, like on Brandis, it held up pretty well. Good chunks of it. And those people, you know, they had horses, and it held up really well with the horseshoes. So no problems, so. And we're responsible for the fencing maintenance as well. That'll be part of the project. So if for some reason it does get destroyed, you know, for whatever reasons, we'll come out and put the fence back up. So, yes, ma'am.
I had a question. It sounds like your preferred choice is the southern alternative.
Correct. We
And-
think that's much more technically feasible.
Okay, and you
And
speak
we know
about,
we can convey a larger amount of water likely.
okay, and you speak about that the right of entries for the southern route have to be in by June 30th. I guess my question is, are you then, if you don't get those, are you then moving to the northern route, or are you doing them both simultaneously right now?
I
Or,
think we want rights of entry for both still, right, Mike?
We'd like as much flexibility as
Yeah.
possible, yeah, so the northern route, the preferred route is still technically feasible. We could put a storm drain system through there.
Smaller, but
this-
we could.
But the southern route is, you know, is the much more preferred route at this point.
okay, I just,
Yeah, we wouldn't be building, there's not enough money to build both corridors at the same time.
okay, so southern route, one or the other, southern is preferred. And so I guess my final question is, if you don't get right of entries by June 30th for the southern, are you still moving on to the northern at that point, or is the deadline for both of them that date?
I would say that right now, we've got pretty strong indication from some people within the northern route that they are not willing to do an easement. So, unless that tide changes, I mean, we can put it back out, but we won't be able to wait very long. We're gonna
'Cause-
have to
because
be
the
able to make a
northern route,
decision to move forward, because we have a lot of work to do.
okay, because the northern route that you have on the slides today is a little different than last fall. So
Is it different?
you still don't have, or you have people on the northern route who were not interested
It's
at this
sli- I
point.
think it's slightly different through the 2.5 acre lots, the smaller lots. I think there was a little bit of
Yeah.
an adjustment on that
Okay.
to make it more feasible.
So this
A
route,
little bit deeper into it.
so this route still has people not interested.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
but I gotta get the water from point A to point B.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
it would have
We
to.
got to get it to the Copeland detention facility. That's the bottom line.
Right, okay, so June
We got to
30th
take it somewhere it can be stored.
for both of them. June 30th is the due date for both of
Yep.
them, really. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Yes, sir.
So right where the both channels converge and it moves south, that's my property. I'm concerned that if there's a large flow of
So
water, that's going to,
Properties now.
but
so-
I'm just saying that it looks like that if there's an area where it would back up,
It's going to be one or the either or.
I understand that, but regardless, like when water bends, it overflows. So it's just kind of strange to me that it's like doing a 90-degree turn. So we could talk about this later,
And
but
that's what we learned in the, from the Wapaki corridor design. And basically, we don't have as much capacity in those channels due to the bends. So, we originally were starting out, initial concept last fall, we were just, okay, if we had a straight channel this size, this slope, we could handle, it was on the order of about 1,800 cubic feet per second. Well, we're learning that that's much less. I mean, it's down to about half of it, and it gets even less the more bends that you have in the channel. So but it all goes back to that no adverse impact modeling that we do.
Right.
We plug in, put in all the infrastructure, design it, digitally, and then run the storm event through it. And then Corey's able to determine what's the impact outside, if it does overtop, what's the impact outside of that channel? And if it's equal to or less, then if we didn't do anything, then that's a no adverse impact.
There is some criteria. We have some flexibility, not very much, but a little bit of flexibility, but not very much in terms of the criteria. It's pretty tight criteria in terms of, they look at the level of inundation, the depth, they look at velocity, both. So that analysis will take place and you'll see that, right? We probably ran it, Corey, at least 10 to 15 times for Wapaki as they march through the engineering process. Tinker with this, run it again. Tinker with that, run it again, right? Trying to shore it up so that we don't have, less apt. That said, it will not mitigate every rainfall event, like I said earlier, right? You get a great big event, there's going to be overflow. Will the impact be less than you had before? Absolutely, because you're pulling out a pretty significant amount of water if we can get this to a decent size, right? Any other more general questions or anything about the process, timing, anything related to that? Yes, ma'am.
So when you get easement and you come on to do the survey, then are you gonna notify?
That's a
the
right of
people?
entry for survey, just a
But
right of
are you
entry.
gonna let people know ahead by phone
Yeah.
or?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and then
Well,
if you
they will
do,
make an effort to get in touch with you.
it's probably too far ahead, but if you do give your easement for the channel, anytime you do maintenance or anything else, you're gonna notify property owners ahead of time.
Typically, we would, if it's like a real emergency situation, right? But no, we would stay within that easement area, right? We're not going to go outside that easement area. If we had to, for some reason, let's say a big tree came down or whatever, something happened and we had to get in there, we would have to come in and get a temporary construction easement actually from you to go in and do that work even on an emergency basis.
Okay, and I have
so
one
you're
more
gonna know.
question. It's technical. Are you putting fiber in the shotcrete or is it just gunite period?
I believe we're using fiber reinforced. That's what they're using in the Brandis channel and the Wapaki channel.
Rick, do you know, because you spec'd it for Brandis.
Yeah, fiber is becoming a cost-effective measure of replacing the rebar, mixing it in at the proper ratio, you can get pretty strong concrete or shotcrete without having the rebar in there, thus being able to speed up the process and save some funds.
Can I please ask one more question? How long has that been studied? Just like the blocks that got put in, they had to be removed at quite a big expense. So how long has the fiber been studied?
What
2
blocks
years?
are you speaking
Uh,
to?
The ones that were in Brandis, whatever you want to call them.
We had 3 different things.
Oh,
on Brandis.
the articulated block?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the blocks.
Yeah, I mean, we made a decision to replace it to actually, was part of increasing the capacity.
Right,
A
that's
lot of the articulated block did okay, actually.
right.
But
That's fine.
it was designed for less than half the flow that we're seeing now. That's the issue, right?
Yeah, like I said, that's fine, but I'm just wondering
That's why we're going to shotcrete.
how long the study was with the fiber and the shotcrete instead of the rebar cloth or the
Well,
rebar.
it's an industry standard now, isn't it, Rick?
How long has
Yeah,
that
like
been
is it
studied?
something brand new or it has some history behind it?
No, we actually used fiber about 8 years ago on Cokefield. Fiber's been around for a while.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
it's not brand new.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still a little bit confused about the north versus the south options. If, on the north route option, if there are property owners that you know with certainty are not willing to provide an easement, then that sounds to me like the north option should be off the table. So I'm curious why, if you're continuing to survey, is that because you have reason to believe they might change their minds, or is that because condemnation is a serious consideration? Help me understand that better.
I think that we can't predispose the engineering of what we may need to actually get through this area, right? So, and through Wupaki process, we ended up realizing that we had to take a quite a bit different tactic and process than we originally conceived. And so if we end up needing to do something in that other alignment, even, and he is saying one or the other, and it is a cost issue, it will be a cost issue, but I don't want to put clamps on his ability to address the issue at this stage. So that's why I would like to get the right of entries for both corridors. But we prefer the southern alignment because we have a very strong belief, and we've already been doing a little bit of pre-looking with Corey's analysis about is it feasible or not. And we think we're pretty confident we can get more water in that alignment. And so I don't want to take it all off the table. I also say that that area has been very heavily impacted. And, when we look at an area like this, the other thing we have to consider is, like Mike said, is that we're going to get events bigger than whatever that design storm we end up achieving, right? We're going to get rainfall events that are bigger. It's going to happen. It's not if, it's when. So where does the water then go after that? And how do we in this corridor, we got a pretty good sense about where it's going now, right? And likely will go. And that's part of why we do the analysis. And then we may need to do some work in that other area, particularly at the upper end, to manage some of that overflow impact potentially as well. So having the right of entry gives us the ability for him to be thinking more broadly right now. Okay, I can take X amount this way. I'm going to have to figure out, do I need to do something else to manage the overflow? The gloves are off. He can jump in and look at that completely. So I would like to have, I'd like to have all the rights of entry. But I'll tell you, if we can get the ones for the southern, we'll run with it. And then we'll deal with the rest. If other consequences come out of that process, then we'll go back and say, hey, we do need this as well, or whatever. And that's why this is an iterative process. This isn't a one and done. We got a lot more conversations to go through. So, yes, ma'am.
By the June due date, is there a future out date where, like what you just mentioned, a deadline for when you would potentially stop the process?
Well, likely we would be to 60%, probably early to mid-fall. Probably mid-fall, we'd be to 60% engineering. And then at that point, we would need the drainage easements to be able to continue that process. And again, we're usually usually at 60%. We'll have another one of these meetings. We'll go through all that with you. Frankly, he'll be having conversations with those of you that are going to need to donate an easement. Probably prior to that is always the goal. So you're not gonna, those of you that are directly impacted aren't gonna come in not knowing where we're headed. And then we would have that meeting and then can go through the process of securing the easements. And there'll be a deadline set for that as well. Because again, if we can't get the utilities relocated there's a lot of utilities to relocate in this process. The goal is really to get a contractor out there and get that work done in the fall so that then we have clearance to put the channel in the spring. And we could have another year like this. Who knows, right? We got a really short construction season this year. You never know. So obviously, whatever we can get done prior to the spring is good, at least to a certain extent. But we can't start any construction until we have all the easements. Yes, sir.
Existing structures and private utilities like septic and
We need to avoid those. We've been pretty successful at doing that. That's another one of the benefits of bifurcating the properties as much as we can. But we'll need to try to avoid those. I think last time we had one property where we had to work with the party on a septic relocation. So, and we helped facilitate that. But it typically won't be an issue. So, yes, sir.
Maybe the septics. The southern one goes by my septic. It goes right by my leach field. Will you move my leach field if you need to?
Well, that's part of
That's
why
it.
they need to get on your property. There's a
We
great
need to
answer
look-
to that.
Yeah.
Because
We need
that's
to
the
look at
kind
your-
of thing they're gonna look at.
See, the maps show that it goes to the east of my house. It actually goes to the south. The maps are wrong.
And that's part of why we need the
You
rights of
mean
entry, so we can
your
survey
septic
and.
system, where the maps say your
The
septic
leach
system.
field, yeah.
Yeah.
They show it going to the east.
That's
It
part
goes to
of
the south.
why they need to come out and meet with you and see
Okay.
where's your leach field, where's your septic tank, where's.
But if it needs to be moved, you'll move it and you'll pay for it?
I can't tell you that yet. It depends on whether we have any other alternative. Because it's an
Okay.
expensive proposition, so can't tell you that at this point.
Hi, my name is Faith Skinner. I live at the top of, almost to the forest, at the very top of this watershed where you guys are all receiving the sediment. It is taking hundreds of feet.
They got the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, we've got the Grand Canyon that is constantly growing. I would just like to plead with everybody to consider the right of entry. You don't have to say yes, you can do construction on our property. But at this point, the numbers that they say we got small storms last year, I'm frankly terrified that it's going to come through my living room, any storm. So every time it rains, and I know that no hardship is greater than another. I know we're all impacted by it, but my children's lives are at stake. And we had to take our livestock off our property for 6 months. Hundreds of feet of fencing were taken down, things like that. Feel free to come by, see us, look at what it looks like. You are invited to my property, 5200 Thames Road. Come look and see what's going on upstream a little bit. Feel free to walk around and see how we can all work together to make this happen for everyone. So if it doesn't really work for your property, perhaps we can work with the next door neighbor or something like that and really make this work so that I can't sell my property at this point. I can't move. So if we can work together, I'd really, really appreciate it and happy to let anybody see what's going on because we're pretty scared for our lives at this point. So.
Thank you, and that's
Thank you.
all facts, what she just articulated. They are very, very, and they're not the only property, but probably the most severe, but there are other properties that are severely impacted as well.
And I'm pretty much in the same spot as you are. I'm on the corner of Kevin's Way and Three Man Trail, and ever since the Schultz fire, I haven't been able to use half of my acreage. because there's just water flowing through it constantly. I mean, and it's pretty much a river exiting my property onto Three-Man Trail and then heading out. And I have a landscape berm there, but I'm really concerned if it's a bigger storm that that's not going to keep it away from the house. And even with some of the storms that we had last time, the sandbags didn't make a difference. It just washed them away because the force of the water is just too much. So, I mean, just, to help some of us be able to utilize all of our property again, and for safety, I'm in the same boat that Faith is, so.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will say too, that if, online, there remain online, the individual lot mitigation that we developed last year before, or early on, but mostly before the flooding, that you should maintain that mitigation. Absolutely maintain your mitigation. And frankly, we're going to tell you to do that even if we get all this work done for a few years until the forest heals more and we see how it performs. But if you had mitigation that you put in last year, short-term sandbags, or if we came in and brought in barrier, and if it was compromised in some way, you had to float around it or over it or something, let us know so that we can come out and take another look and make sure. If it performed well, then, frankly, please don't call us. We got a lot to do. We're trying to get it's all the same engineers doing the same work. So, but if you did, so like in your case, we may need to revisit what we do there. Maybe we need to do something different or add some, usually it's add, right? So, but let us know and we'll have somebody come take a look at it and update, your design. Because obviously those were all developed off the impact maps, and this watershed is moving around. It's moving around, and it's moving to the north to some extent. But it's going to do that. It could move. It moved to the north somewhat last year. This year, it could all move to the south. And the next year after that, it could move back to the north. That's what watersheds do. That's the natural process. What we're doing by restoring these fans and then creating that terminal trench is we're providing the predictability of where that some volume of water, whatever we can mitigate, is going to that place and it's going into that system. That's one of the biggest benefits of doing the on-forest work, is that watershed isn't migrating. So you put a channel here and then next year it's here. And then this year it might be in the channel and 2 years later it might be over here. So it's really important that we have that terminal trench and then that feeds the water into the system. Otherwise, that system up there is going to change constantly. That's part of nature's recovery. We're accelerating the recovery by about 75 years. That's what we're doing.
I completed one of these last year. Do you need it again?
Probably not, but I don't know if, I'm searching for Kitty, if Kitty has a list of who we have. Okay. But we can give her your name and she can let you know if we have it or not, or just fill it in again. And if you don't put down your address. If most of us don't walk around with the APN, assessor's parcel number, in our minds, and just put your address and Kitty can fill that in for you. So, but if you want us to look it up, we can do that too. So, all right, well, let's break. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, one more question.
Okay, just to clarify, I don't need that, believe me.
Well, no, we need it because we'll tape it for people who can't be here.
Okay, well, to clarify, this right of entry form is specifically for people whose property you're hopefully planning to put a channel across. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So if I'm not directly affected by that, you're not interested in?
Probably we don't need that.
Okay.
If you are close to that, though, I'd say one property away, it still might be a really good idea, because we don't know how this is all going to shake out. The more we're prepared, again, I'm taking less chains off of him as he
More
engineers.
flexibility, the better.
Yeah, the more flexibility, the better. But, you know, if you're 3 or 4 properties away from either alignment, then probably we don't need it.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, you can. You can either bring them by the Public Works, or you can mail them to us. The mailing address is 5600 Commerce Avenue. Just put Flood Control District, 5600 Commerce Avenue, Flagstaff, 86004.
And where's the public works at?
We're at the end of Commerce. It's out behind the mall, off of, what is that, Dunlap, right? Yeah, if you know where the FUSD bus barn is, or Landscape Connections. We own the other half of Sheep Hill. One half is Landscape Connections, the other half is us.
The bus barn.
Correct. Yeah, we're to the, no, where the bus barn is. Bus barn. Yeah. Commerce is the net, they're off of Penstock, and I forget what the next one is off the roundabout there, but we're off of Commerce. If you take Commerce all the way to the end, it dead ends into Public Works. Yeah. There's an office there. You can just, they'll get it to us, don't worry. Yeah. It's 7 to 3:30, I think, is their current hours. So, yeah. Yeah, I think we can take an email copy. Obviously, it has to be signed. That's the key. Yes. So yeah, if you want to sign it, scan it, and email it, that's fine. Kitty can give you her email address, and you can email it to Kitty. Or send it here, either one. Yeah, that's fine too. Get it to us.
Also, I'm happy to meet with anybody if they've got any questions about the preliminary design and what we're looking at and what alternatives may be possible with respect to your property.
Yeah.
Just, you can contact, I forgot to
Yeah.
put my.
No, and it's better to
contact
contact
me and then Shannon. will get hold of it.
We can
And
orchestrate it so it's efficient for him too. All right, let's break and we'll go back and take a look at the plans and ask your specific questions there, please. And thank you very much for being here this evening. Really appreciate y'all taking the time and coming out.